Yesterday, I wondered from which countries each weapon of Counter-Strike comes from. And today we are going to try and answer that very question. Starting off with the CT knife, which comes from Germany. The T-knife comes from Russia. Both the USP and the P2000 comes from Germany. The Glock 18 comes from Austria. The P250 comes from the US. The Berettas comes from Italy. Surprisingly, the Tech 9 comes from Sweden. The 5.7 comes from Belgium. The CZ75 comes from Czech Republic. The Revolver comes from the US. The Desert Eagle comes from the US and Israel. The Nova comes from Italy. Sourdough comes from the US. The Max 7 comes from South Africa. The XM1014 comes from Italy. MP9 comes from Switzerland. The Mac 10 comes from the US. The MP7, MP5SD and UMP45 come from Germany. The PP Bison comes from Russia. The P90 comes from Belgium. The Negev comes from Israel, while the M249 comes from the US and Belgium. The SSG-08 comes from Austria. The Galil comes from Israel. Le FAMAS vient de la France. Obviously, both the M4A1S and the M4A4 come from the US. AK-47 comes from Russia. The AUG comes from Austria. SG-553 comes from Switzerland. The G3 SG-1 comes from Germany, while the SCAR 20 comes from Belgium. The AWP comes from the United Kingdom, while the C4 and the Zeus X27 both comes from the US. And so, we have 5 countries which only have one weapon in Counter-Strike. Those are the UK, France, South Africa, Czech Republic and Sweden. We then have 5 other countries which scored between 2 and 3. At the third place comes Belgium with a score of 3.5. On the second place comes Germany with an amazing score of 7. And our top one, of course, the United States with a score of 9. But if we took into account the different knives, the score would have been pretty much the same. The United States would have had 19, Germany still 7, but Italy would come at number 3 with 4 weapons.